You're listening to Big World Network.
The 10th God of the Infinite Polygon, Episode 1, by Tatiana Mutinelli. Read by Catherine Ricks. The midday sun sparkled in the blue-green sky above. The western winds danced playfully through the golden heads of grain in the field of the Edgeward family farm. A lone flugelhawk looped lazily above the land in search of scurrying miniodiles, while the youngest Edgewards sat in the shade of a lonely tree and watched. What a fine way to spend a day, he thought aloud, his bright brown eyes narrowing as they tracked the bird and its twirling feathers that went looping through the air. What a fine world to live in. This Edgeward, Altor was his name, was a man 22 quakes old, and he had spent every one living and working on this farm. When he had been younger, his father, now old and cantankerous by all accounts, had taken him into town in their donkey-drawn wagon every other bread day to sell grain at the market in Tamu. Now Altor went alone, and the townsfolk all knew him by sight. Simple cloth tunic for a shirt, short hooded cloak for the rain and wind, satchel for the beetle shells they would pay him, and a pointed green felt cap, simply because he liked it. As he passed, they would mention to one another how surprised they were that such a well-mannered, good-natured young man had been raised by such an old crab. Altor's mother had died when Altor was very young. He could not even picture her face, and had been raised by his father alone. My, how the sun goes back and forth, the villagers of Tamu would exclaim to one another after Altor had gone past with his loads of grain. It seems only a quake ago he was as tall as a horn-toothed hound, and now he comes all the way out to town on his own. I hear he takes care of that cantankerous old father of his all by himself. Is that so? Methought the old crab was dead. By the great gods, that Altor Edgeward is a fine young man. Right fine. But Altor didn't mind taking care of his cantankerous father. In truth, Altor didn't mind much of anything. He was one of the most content, if not the most content, person in all the world, which is at least partly why he was chosen. Now the eastern winds whistled through the ripening grain. The flugelhawk called out to no one, and Altor sat beneath the tree, thinking nothing in particular about the world, and how nice it was. It was tree day, and tomorrow he would go into town with fresh sacks of grain to sell. It was sun season, and soon he would need to gather wood for the coming cold before the next quake. "Boy!" His father's call interrupted Altor's musings, and reminded him that the old man had probably finished his lunch. "Boy!" his father shouted again. "Turtle toes! Horse hiccups!" Anyone but Altor would have found the older Edgeward's frequent, unintelligible demands frustrating and grating on the nerves. But Altor was so accustomed to them that he merely took the man's bellowings as a sign that he still had healthy lungs and was fighting back against his mind's decline by insisting that its broken faculties of speech still be put to use. It was quite a soldierly effort. Altor got up from his spot beneath the tree and went into their small wooden house. His old, wild-bearded father lay glaring at Altor from the bed. Altor smiled and gently took an empty bowl and spoon from his father's gnarled, grasping hands. "Is this what you wanted?" he asked politely. His father's glare was his only reply, so Altor took the dishes outside to the basin to wash them. No sooner had he stepped across the threshold when suddenly something in the distance caught his eye. It was gleaming white like a star, so bright that Altor had to blink several times and squint just to be able to look at it. And when he was finally able, he lifted his head in surprise. A woman, bright, luminous woman, was walking toward him through the grain. She had 2 great wings like those of a swan, and white flowing hair like the mane of a wild mount. She was draped in a white fabric that Altor could not name, and as she approached, he saw that, like the mighty sword she carried in her left hand, the fabric appeared to be on fire. The woman stepped out of the grain field and set her bare feet in the dirt. She placed her sword point down on the ground, and it stood there, straight, as tall as she was and just as bright, as if by magic. She surveyed the small wooden house, the barn, the lonely tree, and then turned her gaze to Altor, who stood there with the bowl and spoon like a meager sword and shield against her awesome presence. At last she opened her mouth, and words flowed out in a feminine but deep, commanding voice, though her lips and tongue did not move. "Are you the man called Altor Edgeward?" Altor had been preparing himself for the moment she would speak, and had expected that he would not know how to reply. But now that the time had come, he found that there was only one thing for him to say. "Yes." "Good. Follow me." She turned and began to walk back through the field the way she had come, leaving her sword behind. After a moment's pause, Altor dropped the wet bowl and spoon into his satchel and obeyed. After all, it wasn't every day the Edgeward farm had a visitor, let alone a visitor who shone like a star and seemed to be on fire. He walked quickly through the knee-high grain field until he was just behind the woman. He began slowly. "Do you have a name, m'lady?" "Yes," came the deep, solemn reply. Altor waited a moment, but the woman said nothing more. "Oh." He looked back at the retreating farm where the magnificent sword stood blazing. "Well, are you sure you mean to leave your sword?" he asked. "Yes," came the reply again. "Oh. Then may I ask where we're going?" "In time, all will be made known that must be made known. And indeed, all will be made known, Altor Edgeward." This was quite a puzzle. Altor pondered it for a moment, then hurried to walk alongside the woman. She was walking very quickly, and he almost had to jog to keep pace with her. "May I ask what you are, my lady?" he said. "You may." What are you?" For the first time since she had first spoken to him, the woman looked down into Altor's eyes. "I am an angel." Altor blinked back at her. Her brightness was just as intense as it had been from the beginning, but it no longer hurt his eyes. "How unusual," he mused. The angel turned her gaze back to the path ahead. "Not in the slightest," she replied, no hint of indignation in her voice. No. We are quite common in the heavens, you see," she went on solemnly. "Quite common indeed." "But here in the world," Altor said, not quite sure whether it was appropriate for one to make casual conversation with an angel like this. "That is another matter," the angel conceded, and the two lapsed into silence for a few moments. Altor looked back at the sword again. "Will you go back for it when our business is done?" he asked. "I beg your pardon?" "The sword, that is. Will you go back for it?" "I will," the angel replied, "but it is very heavy, and I have carried it all day, and we still have a long way to walk." "Can you not fly?" Altor asked, looking at her swan wings. "I can fly, but today I have already flown from the heavens to the Polygon, and I am tired." Altor cocked his head. "From the heavens to the what?" "In time, all will be made known that must be made known. And indeed, all will be made known, Altor Edgeward." There was a pause. "Now you may ask where we are going." "Oh, well," Altor said, "where are we going?" "To your western edge." Altor stopped in his tracks. "The edge?" he repeated incredulously. But no one goes to the edge." The angel stopped and turned back to face Altor. "Do you know what an angel is?" she asked flatly. For the first time since their meeting, Altor suddenly felt he had committed a great offense. Before he could think what to reply, the angel went on. "An angel is a messenger of the 9 great gods," she said, speaking faster than she had before. "And that is what I am. I am an angel. I am a messenger of the 9 great gods. I have a message for you, Altor Edgeward, and I will give it to you in time. But first, we are traveling to the edge." She turned and waited a moment. "Will you not follow?" Altor was truly torn. His course of action had been clear until now. It seemed right to do as the angel said. After all, she was an angel, a messenger of the 9 great gods. But the edge was a terrible place, said to be guarded by hideous monsters. Men were forbidden from traveling to the edge. The 9 great gods had decreed it. Every child knew that. "Will you not follow?" the angel repeated. Altor looked back at the Edgeward family farm, where he had spent all his 22 quakes. His father was probably shouting. The sword was gleaming. He looked back at the angel. She had reached the boundary of the grain field. Beyond lay grassy green hills, sprinkled with outcrops of purple-gray rock. A miniodile skittered for cover. A flugelhawk looped over the hills in the distance. Looped and looped, tugged on his heart. Seemed to say, "What a fine way to spend a day. What a fine world to live in. But you don't live in it, Altor. Not yet." So Altor took a deep breath and closed his eyes. "Yes," he said, "I'm coming."
Visit BigWorldNetwork.com for more e-series samples, or sign up for a $3 a month subscription for full access to all written and audio e-series content, accessible from the website, mobile, or e-reader devices. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Big World Network.